Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Gita, Memoirs of a Psychiatrist. As I've mentioned to you before, I would love it if you would get yourself a copy of the Gita in whatever language you feel comfortable in, and look at it and read the chapters as you listen to this.
Yes.
And by the way, in your comments on Facebook, maybe you can write whether it's good for you if I read the verse beforehand or just go into the explanation, because the reading of the verse itself, if you have it, becomes redundant.
Right.
But anyway, last time we dropped off at verse 16, chapter 3, verse 16. So just to repeat, in that, Krishna talks about the chakra, which is the wheel. And he says you have to sacrifice your desires, your ego. You have to pitch yourself a higher desire to get there, a higher purpose in life, higher than yourself, rather than your selfish, egocentric, self-centered desires, as we all tend to do right now. Because without sacrifice, you won't get to the Brahman.
Right.
To get back to Brahman,
and that's the wheel, right?
Circle.
Yeah.
That's the wheel.
Yeah.
You came from Brahman. You're now spiritual being. You're now a human experience. Spiritual being having a human experience, wanting to get back to being the spiritual being. Without sacrifice, you're just living to fulfill your desires. And your desires are insatiable. They never get fulfilled. You can never fulfill them. The more you try to fulfill them, the greater they are. And the more their desires are, the more your vasanas become, so that during your deep sleep, your vasanas are getting deeper and deeper
Right.
and deeper, and you're getting further and further into the hole. Whereas if you do service in a higher purpose, you're actually burning off your vasanas. It works in strange ways. Number one, it gets rid of your desires. Number two, it gets you closer to Brahman. And look at it this way. You get neutralized. Neutralization is a very important concept when it comes to desires.
Mm-hmm.
Because Gautam Jain used to give us this example of chocolate ice cream. He said, suppose you come home after being away for a long time, and you sit there, your mom knows that you like chocolate ice cream. So as soon as you walk in, she gives you a hug, says, I haven't seen you for such a long time. Guess what I have for you? A big bowl of your favorite chocolate ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
You start eating the chocolate ice cream, you say, wow, this is great. And you say, I'm going to take a nap. You wake up, you come down, here's another bowl of chocolate ice cream. And for the next 5 days, you have like 15 bowls of ice cream every day. What's going to happen? You're going to get fed up of that chocolate ice cream. You say, I can't stand this chocolate ice cream anymore. Your desires have not gone down. Just your taste for that chocolate ice cream has gone down. And you can apply this to all your other senses, whether it's music, listening to a song, whether it's any sensual contact. As you start to get more acclimatized to it, you get neutralized to it. And you say, I don't like this. But the desires keep increasing. So what he's saying in this verse 16 is that if you want to get back to Brahman,
Can I catch it? Can I catch us up? If you make sure I'm listening here, you become sick of it. These desires don't fulfill what you really need, because you go from wanting it to protecting it to desiring it. There's no end to it, so the desire just keeps going. So you never satiate that desire.
Not only do you not satiate it, you get actually turned off to it.
Yeah.
So and the other contrary aspect, which is more harder to understand, is the less you have contact with the sense objects, when you have contact with them, ultimately, you really get a higher pleasure.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So the concept is that the further away you draw from the sense objects, the greater your happiness and bliss, because you don't have contact with them. It's hard to understand, because you say, well, if I never have contact with the chocolate ice cream, how will I have experience of it? But it's true that by withdrawing and withdrawing and withdrawing, you have no contact with these objects, sense objects, your pleasure goes up higher and higher. That's why in bliss, with these yogis that don't have any of the sense objects, they're in constant happiness, constant anand, sat chit anand, satchit anand, which is the highest bliss, which is permanent.
Mm-hmm.
So verse 17, Verse 17, and again, I ask you to tell me if I should read these verses or not, but here I'm reading it. But the man who rejoices in the self, with a capital S, is satisfied in the self, content in the self. For him, nothing is to be done. So he mentions self 3 times here. And that basically is the mind, the body, and the intellect. Here he is referring, Krishna, sorry?
Oh, interesting.
Krishna is referring to a person who becomes self-realized. He then has everything. There's no reason to act. We only act because we have desires, right?
Yes.
We have vasanas, which become a thought. Thought becomes a desire. Desire makes you act. The self-realized person has no desires, no thoughts about anything that he wants or needs to acquire. So he uses satisfaction 3 times here to satisfy the mind, the body, and the intellect. The self-realized person doesn't have any of this, so he doesn't have to act. That doesn't mean he doesn't act. Self-realized people actually act all the time, not for themselves, for others. Take a look at Buddha. He walked through the forest, helping poor people, helping sick people all the time. Look at Krishna. He was always acting. Look at Christ. Never just sat down, put up his feet, and says, hey, listen, I got everything. I'm happy. He was always doing service for others. Now comes verse 18 and 19, which is, 18 says, for him there's no interest whatever here in what is done or what is not done, nor does he depend upon any beings for any object. So most of us were constantly worried about what is being done. Yes. Did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? He has nothing to worry about in terms of what is being done, doesn't care. Or what is not being done. He says, oh my God, you forgot to do that. You didn't do it. The self-realized person doesn't care what is done and what is not done. We always say, I better be nice to Lou. I need Lou to do X, Y, Z for me. Mm-hmm. He says the self-realized person does not depend on any being for any object because he needs no object.
Right.
He needs no beings, needs no objects, he needs nothing done. And he doesn't care if nothing is done. He will do it. Verse 19 says, therefore, without attachment, always perform actions which should be done, which ought to be done. For by performing actions without attachment, man reaches the supreme. Fairly self-explanatory. Don't be attached to selfish goals, needs, drives, or say, I'm going to get this reward if I do this. Instead, perform actions not because you like to or because something is going to come to you from it, but because you ought to do it. And by doing these actions without attachment to what you're getting out of it, you will ultimately reach the supreme. And during the course of that, you'll burn off your vasanas and you become self-realized. Now comes verse 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24. So I'm going to go through these fairly quickly because they're all Krishna's way of appealing to Arjuna to do something. And in a way, it teaches us the way in which people can manipulate us. Just like Krishna is telling Arjuna what to do. I'm not saying he's manipulating, but Arjuna, and this is misunderstood by a lot of Westerners. They say, what? Your God is telling Arjuna that he must war, must fight, must kill? Remember that the people he was going to fight with, although they were his cousins and relatives, were really, really bad people.
Right.
They were doing extremely bad things. And if a warrior doesn't fight them, who's going to fight them? They took over the kingdom. They were ruling with a very heavy hand. People were miserable. And if a king, such as Arjuna, didn't fight them, nobody else would fight them, and they would keep on going.
That was Arjuna's dharma, right?
Sorry?
That was Arjuna's dharma, right?
That was his dharma. He was a warrior. I mean, it's like saying there are terrorists coming into my town, and I'm being warned of it, and I pick up the phone and call the police or the local military or the task force or the SWAT team and say, hey, guys, come help me. And that's their job,
right,
which is to protect me. But they say, I don't feel right about doing it because some of those guys are my friends.
Yeah.
I'd say, hey, this is your duty. That's your dharma. You got to do it. So Krishna appeals to Arjuna to do this in verses 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. He uses persuasion, he uses a personal appeal, he uses fear, and he uses threats. So in verse 20, it says, whatsoever the superior person does, that alone other people do. Whatever standard he sets, the standard world follows. That standard the world follows. So he's talking about devotion, and he's also flattering Arjuna here, saying that in past traditions, such as past great people in the past, there was tremendous respect for their elders. And you said they did it, so you should do it too. Perform the action.
Lead by example.
Lead by example. Verily by action alone, Janaka and others attained perfection. Even with an eye to the welfare of the world, also you should perform action. So Janaka was a great king, and he basically did a lot for his welfare of his people. And in doing so, he attained self-realization, because even though he was king, he was reveling in money, wealth, whatever, but he did for others. And so he says, he uses that to say, just like past traditions, past great people, Janaka, they did it, so you should do it. Verse 21 is this is verse 21. Whatsoever the superior person does, that alone other people do. Whatever standard he sets, that standard the world follows. That's persuasion. You don't want to do it for yourself,
right,
but at least for the sake of others, do it, people that follow you. And the example in the Ramayana, which is different from the Mahabharata, another epic in Hindu mythology, Ram, Sita, and Lakshman set off into the forest. They were about to be coronated. Their stepmother, Bharat's mother, said, you're banished to the woods, to the forest for 14 years, and no wealth, nothing, no chariots, no horses, just walk. So they walked barefoot into the forest. And when Bharat found out about this, he was really mad with his mother and said, I'm going to go after them. And so he set off walking behind them, and he could have taken a horse, he could have taken a chariot, and he said, no, my brothers, they were his stepbrothers, but he considered them his brothers. He said, my brothers walked, I'm going to walk. Behind him walked a whole contingent, a massive amount of people, including his elders. And they said to him, look, you can walk because you're young, but if you walk, everybody else is going to walk, including the old people and the ladies and the seniors. So why don't you get onto a carriage? And he said, all right, for their sake, I'll do it. So what this is saying is, you don't want to do it for yourself, but at least for the others, please do it. So this Sanskrit saying is, yatha raja tatha praja, means as the Raja, the king, does, so does the populace. So as the father, as the president, as the king, as a senior member, as the CEO, anybody, if you want the other people to do below you, you've got to be that way. You can't expect to be coming into work at 12 o'clock in the afternoon and expect everybody else to come at 7 o'clock in the morning and be working hard.
Right.
They say, this guy's lazy, he doesn't do it, why should I? But if you get there 7 o'clock in the morning, you think anybody dare to be late? They say, boss is there at 7 o'clock, you're going to be there. So it's basically also teaching us that cleanliness, punctuality, efficiency, politeness, respect, all of this is something, these are qualities that as we get older, as we become senior, it's good for us so that the younger people follow it. Outer prosperity comes automatically when you do this. Inner spirituality comes, and also society benefits when you do this. Verse 21, then verse 22. Verse 22 says, there is nothing in the three worlds that has to be done by me, nor anything unattained that has to be attained. So Krishna says, I don't have to do anything, but I still do it. So similarly, you should do it. Krishna, don't forget, is a self-realized being. He's a king also. But he chooses to ride Arjuna's chariot. He doesn't have to do it, but he is a ordinary driver, just like in today's day we'd say this is the driver of my car. He's driving Arjuna's chariot. After the Mahabharata war, Yudhishthir threw a big party. And at that party, everybody had some jobs to do. Krishna chose the job of going outside and taking everybody's slippers, because in those days you didn't walk into the house or the palace with your slippers on. Krishna's job was to take the slippers, put them together, and then wash the guests' feet. Mm-hmm. It was a mark of great respect to be able to wash. People walked in the dust and dirt from wherever they're coming, and their feet were dirty, paining, hurting, so they would wash the feet. Such a self-realized person washing somebody else's feet. Then Yudhishthir's, they were doing a big havan inside, and the priest says, we need a self-realized person whose feet we have to wash. Who is there? They said, oh, Krishna's outside. Well, let's get him. He come outside, he's washing somebody else's feet. He says, you want to wash my feet? Okay, I'll come. So he switches roles and says, okay, I'm self-realized. You want to wash my feet? Go ahead. And he can do it. So he attains everything. He has attained. He has nothing to attain, but he still performs his action. So that's what he says in that. He says, there's nothing in the three worlds. The three worlds means the heavens, the earth, and the netherworlds. So, or it could mean waking state, dream state, and the deep sleep state. I need nothing. Mm-hmm. It's like saying to an ocean, if I give you a teaspoon of water, would it make a difference? Ocean says you can put a teaspoon of water here. It's not going to make a difference to me. Yep. You say, well, can I take a teaspoon of water from you? You can take a bucket full of water from me. It's not going to make any difference. Similarly, self-realized person says, I can do whatever for you. You can take whatever from me. I can give you anything. It doesn't make any difference.
Right.
Verse 23 says, if indeed I do not ever engage in action, unwearied, men would in every way follow my path. So he's using fear, meaning if you don't act, others will stop acting.
Yeah.
At that time, in those days, thousands of years before the Common Era, there was a fear of doing something that would affect the population. So there was a fear that others would get hurt. So he's saying, if I don't engage in action, others will stop acting. Arjuna, if you don't do it, other people will stop acting. You need to do this. So he's using that as a fear. And the last one, verse 24, says, these worlds would perish if I did not perform action. I should be the cause of confusion of castes and would destroy these people, meaning a threat. So that's the last and final one where he says to Arjuna, you know, if I don't act, all these people will stop acting. They will not do their stuff. There will be a lot of confusion, and the same applies to you. So please act. So these, I went through them quickly because it's there. It's in the Gita. I want to go through every single verse without missing it, but maybe not as important to all of you, but it's necessary. So we did the 24. Starting next time, which is verse 25, comes how to act. What do you need to do? What do you need to do to act? And that should be in about 11 verses, should be very interesting. Thank you for joining us.
So today we talked about, in the past we talked about the desire to act for the greater good. Today we talked about the necessity of it.
Correct.
Yeah.
That, and how Krishna is making Arjuna act, what he's saying to convince him to act.
All right. Thank you. Go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, search the Gita Memoirs on there for audio-only podcasts. If you're listening to the podcast right now, head on over to our Facebook page, the Gita Memoirs, leave a comment, ask a question, let us know what you like and what you dislike, and see the video versions of these. So we hope you're enjoying both sides.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Lou.